Very glad to get the opportunity to talk with you all. And I'm a professor at the University of Virginia, and I've been studying social emotional learning for the last 20 or so years. And I'm just really happy to have the chance to share this information and have this conversation with all of you as families of children at Charlottesville City Schools. I should say, Bianca, thank you very much for the invitation too. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So what you'll need for today's conversation. So on Zoom, we'll use talk, and I'll talk. We'll use the chat feature. Feel free to use the hand raised feature at the end where it says participants. If you have clarifying questions while I'm talking, feel free to raise your hand and Bianca will call on you. And then we'll make sure we have about 15 minutes at least at the end for some longer question and answer. And aside from Zoom, I want to remind you to have access to some personal comforts because I know it's about 6 p.m. This is not always the easiest hour for most parents. And I want to make sure you're comfortable, sitting in a good chair and ready to learn. And welcome to Family University. I love the name. Okay, so why am I so eager to talk about social and emotional skills? Well, to start with, I think, of course, they're critically important, and I'm hoping that you'll agree by the end of this conversation. But I just wrote a book called SEL from the Start that's meant for teachers who want to improve the ways that they meet children's emotional needs and social needs in the classroom. The other reason is I want to describe, I have two Charlottesville City School graduates here. This is my daughter, Davida, and my son, Sam, and they both came through the Charlottesville City Schools. And it's just a wonderful chance to be able to talk to you all as a member of the community. I should also mention all the proceeds from SEL from the Start, this book for teachers, is going to City of Promise here in Charlottesville. I've really been impressed with the way they've really done incredible work during the pandemic period. So to start, I want to say congratulations to all of you parents. I do not know how you've all managed to make it to where you are today through this pandemic. Some of you having 3 or 4 or more children at home, some of you as sole parents, people losing their jobs, people losing loved ones to COVID. And I want to just take a moment and say congratulations to making it to March 22nd, 2021. And I hope you acknowledge what you've accomplished. Seems very, very important. There are going to be 3 parts to today's talk. First, I'm going to talk about what social emotional skills are all about. And then I'm going to talk about how kids learn, how children and youth learn these social emotional skills. And then we'll talk about what you can do to improve your children's social emotional skills, especially given the pandemic. And that will come in sort of the form of some take-home messages, and then we'll go into the questions. So what is social and emotional learning anyway? So you may have heard a lot about this in the news. You might hear some things about, how social emotional learning can help improve some in kids' engagement in school. You might have learned about how elementary schools are using social emotional learning. You might have heard of something like responsive classroom or zones of regulation. Those are examples of social emotional learning programs. You might be hearing about the effects of chronic stress of children in school. And social emotional learning is meant to be something that can meet and address some of those needs of children in schools. And then you'll also hear about debates. People will sometimes say that social emotional learning is what families should be doing, it's not necessarily the school's responsibility. I see this as a very shared activity, that it's not just families, it's not just schools, it's not just communities. This is something that everybody needs to do together to help kids learn. So you've probably been hearing about social emotional learning in various ways in the news. So we know that teachers and principals believe this is important. This is the result of a survey of about 25,000 teachers and principals about 2 years ago. And what you can see over here on the y-axis is the percentage of principals or teachers. So it goes all the way up to 100%. And the green is very important and the blue is fairly important. And you can see all of these skills, principals and teachers are saying, over 90% of principals and teachers are saying these skills are important. These skills include things like understanding and managing emotions, making responsible decisions, learning mindsets, developing a sense of identity. So you can see principals and teachers are saying these are incredibly important skills. We need to understand them more, and we need to help kids develop these skills. We also have seen some state and national focus on social emotional learning. And now we have 50 states have preschool social emotional standards, much like their math standards or reading standards. There's some social emotional learning standards, and 11 states have extended those into early elementary, and 14 states have K through 12 social emotional competencies. So this is like, a situation where if you stub your toe, then everything you read is about a stub toe. So now that we're talking about social emotional learning, next time you pick up the newspaper, you're going to see it everywhere. When you're, on the web, you're going to see all these things about social emotional learning. It's really been everywhere in the news, particularly during the pandemic period. So let's talk about a definition. Social emotional learning is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. So when I introduce social emotional learning to most people, particularly parents, they say, well, would you like your child to show self-control sometimes? And instantly they say yes. And I said, well, then clearly you are interested in social emotional learning, because that's just part of part of that social emotional learning process. Now, there are a couple things that I want to call attention to in this. One is that social emotional learning isn't just about kids, it's about all young people and adults. This is a really important issue because adults are still developing their social and emotional skills. And especially if you're somebody who's been thinking about the way that you interact with people of different races and ethnicities, and if you're someone who has been trying to develop cultural competency skills, those are examples of some of the social and emotional skills that you're trying to learn as an adult. And what's exciting about this is those are skills that can be acquired. The other thing is that as a social emotional learning has to do with applying the knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So some of it is about knowledge, some of it is about skills, like things like taking turns, and some of it is about attitudes, these attitudes and beliefs that you hold about yourself and about other people. So these are a few key things when we talk about social emotional learning. So you might have heard a lot of other names for it. You might have heard soft skills, character, non-cognitive skills, 21st century skills, mindset, social emotional skills. So as I say those, are those skills, you can put it in the chat or say aloud, are those skills that are familiar to you? Do they sound familiar or nod? Okay, we'll go ahead and talk about what some of these skills are about. And with each one of these, I have a few examples of what this looks like in kids. This is sort of an overall framework, and we're going to be focusing on the ones that are in the middle, these self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, social awareness, and relationship skills. An important idea here is that these are not things that just come from home or just from school. They come from homes, communities, schools, and classrooms, and that's how kids learn all these skills, these very important skills. Let's talk about self-awareness. Okay. As I talk about each one of these skills, I encourage you to reflect on your own children or yourself, if you're comfortable doing that, and give examples of these skills in the chat. It makes it more fun, a little bit more interactive, but also there are these things where you may have really good self-awareness skills in some areas or not others. And it's worth pointing that out because it makes it very concrete and very, a little bit more engaging to think about. So one thing about self-awareness is the ability to identify one's own emotions. So when you have a really bad day, okay, you know you've had a bad day, but it's not always difficult to understand things like what's the difference between jealousy and sadness at times, or maybe shame and embarrassment. So, and sometimes we are very good at masking our own emotions because we don't want to think about how painful they are. And So identifying one's emotions is part of this self-awareness. Another part is knowing your own cultural, linguistic, and personal strengths. So understanding your own cultural identity is part of self-awareness, knowing who you are, knowing who you aren't. Demonstrating honesty and integrity, that's another part of self-awareness. Experiencing self-efficacy, examining your prejudices and your biases. Time spent doing that is time helping yourself become more self-aware. Having a growth mindset, so believing that you have some control over your ability to accomplish things. Developing interests and a sense of purpose. Those are all things that involve self-awareness. Okay, so we asked some sixth graders about, one of the questions we asked them was, do you ever feel misunderstood? And this sixth grader said something very insightful. And it's a little hard to untangle, but let me describe it. This sixth grader said, maybe sometimes when somebody says something that's not really kind, I get a little defensive and upset. And I could be trapped, kind of like blocking them out when they're trying to do something. And they might get the wrong impression that I'm closed off and I don't want to talk to people. I thought this is a very insightful example of self-awareness, that the sixth grader understands that he or she gets upset when somebody says something that's kind of mean, and then they sort of block people off when somebody is trying to fix that meanness. That's an incredible amount of self-awareness. And it reminds us of kids are so capable, so much is possible. Let's talk about self-management. This is where the good old self-control comes in. And self-management, boy, everybody's self-management skills have been tested during this pandemic. If your self-management skills have not been tested, you have not lived through this pandemic, because we've all got this. This is a tough one. So it's the ability to manage one's emotions. So when you feel like screaming, but instead you say something very patient and sweet, that's a nice example of self-management. Sometimes we can't make it through a day without a little bit of self-management there. Identifying and using stress management strategies. So knowing what it is that you do to manage stress, that's self-management. Exhibiting self-discipline and self-motivation, that's an example of self-management. And think about like the high school kids who are sitting on their computers trying to go to Zoom classes. They are doing a lot of self-discipline and self-motivation. Setting personal goals, that's an example of self-management. Using planning and organizational skills, boy, that has been taxed to the hilt in kids and schools this year. And then showing the courage to take initiative, that involves self-management. These are hard skills. They require a lot of self-control. And when we're tired or when we're upset, it's really hard to exhibit these self-management skills well. So like I said, if you're seeing yourself in any of these skills, feel free to pop that in the chat. So here's some examples of relationship skills. These will be even more familiar. Relationship skills involve communicating effectively, developing positive relationships, demonstrating cultural competency falls into these relationship skills. Practicing teamwork and collaborative problem solving, resolving conflicts constructively, and resisting negative social pressure. That all takes really good relationship skills. And I would say our relationship skills have also been tested during this time. We know that a lot of families are spending more time with the people in their families more than ever before. And it's bringing out really, some challenging new situations. Hard to miss people when they don't go away, as one might say. So here's an example. Yes, a sixth grader, can you share a time when someone has shown you empathy at school? Now, this is an example of a child showing empathy and showing a relationship skill. And this girl says, one of my best friends, actually, no matter what happens, she's always by my side and helps me through things, and she relates to what's happening. And I feel like she shows me a lot of empathy by doing that. This is a beautiful example of some really high quality relationship skills in the sixth grade. Let's talk about social awareness. Okay, remember there were 5. We're on number 4 here. So social awareness is about taking other people's perspectives, recognizing strengths in others. Now, remember, it's really easy to recognize strengths in others when you really like them, but it's not so easy to recognize strengths in others when you don't like them. Demonstrating empathy and compassion, showing concern for the feelings of others, understanding and expressing gratitude, identifying diverse social norms, including ones that are unjust, and being aware of those, being aware of, your own privilege is an example of self-awareness, and of other people's privilege is an example of social awareness. Understanding the influences of organizations and systems on behavior, becoming aware of issues of systemic inequality that exists in this country, that's part of social awareness. And that is part of one of these social emotional skills that we want to understand. Okay, so here's one 6th grade boy talking about something that suggests really nice skills around social awareness. Everybody has their own thing and everybody does their own thing. So you can't judge anybody. If you're the same or you do different things, you can't judge people if they don't judge you and respect you for who you are and like who you are. So it's a lot of just like know them by their own culture or something. This was in response to a question about respect. And you could see that this boy was learning how to respect people who were different than him. Okay, let's talk about the 5th skill, which is responsible decision-making. This means demonstrating curiosity and open-mindedness. This means learning how to make reasoned judgments after analyzing information, data, facts, identifying solutions for personal and social problems, anticipating and evaluating the consequence of one's actions. I think every single person in this Zoom has had a situation where they might have miscalculated the consequences of their actions and then acted and then have been unpleasantly surprised. And then we have reflecting on one's role to promote personal, family, and community well-being. Those are examples of responsible decision-making. We spend a lot of time with our adolescents sort of cultivating these skills. Okay, so here's some kids in a classroom and they're doing a science project where they have a wire, they have a battery, they have a bulb, and they have to try to make the bulb light up. And what you can see here is the kids have to work together and they basically have to use some relationship skills and their social awareness to make that light up. Well, this is so true in a classroom. This is so true outside the classroom. This is so true in society, that we need all of these different social and emotional skills to be able to do things cooperatively with others and to manage our own emotions in effective ways. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how children and youth learn social and emotional skills. Okay, so children learn social and emotional skills every single day. It's just that they don't always learn the skills that we want them to learn. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, is that kids are always watching the people around them and they are always absorbing and learning these skills. So sometimes as families, what we try to do is we try to get our kids to be around kids where we want them to be learning social skills from those kids. But the ways that they learn these are kind of interesting. Kids practice these skills at home, in school, and beyond. They make mistakes. They learn skills through instruction. So teachers might teach kids explicitly how to show empathy, or how to manage strong emotions, or how to be respectful. And then children learn these skills from watching children, youth, and adults around them. One of the really important things here is that one commonality in the way that kids learn skills is that they learn skills, social emotional skills, through supportive relationships, typically with adults, but also with peers and other mentors. And these supportive relationships end up being really important. So every parent has a really important role and every adult who interacts with kids has a really important role in teaching these social emotional skills. Okay, so we're going to dig in on learning these social emotional skills. So here's a beautiful example of everything all at once: practicing, watching, learning these skills, and also the adult supports that can be there to really help kids develop skills. So we asked a 6th grader about how she learned about empathy. And here's what she said. One of my teachers called it being an influencer. If you do something, you influence the people around you, and then they influence people around them. And it just keeps going like that. And I think that's how the teachers started. The teachers have empathy and show empathy, and the students catch on. And then the people around the students, like younger siblings or kids from other schools, friends from other schools catch on. And in the end, it would take a long time, but the whole world would be empathetic. So let me ask, how does that make you feel? It makes me feel hopeful, relieved, impressed that kids can feel this. I'm really struck by here, this shows the closeness between a teacher and a student, that the teacher, that the student, this student really sees this teacher as really being important, and that the teacher isn't just teaching about empathy, but is also modeling empathic behaviors. You can also see that the teacher's really tuned into the child by calling it and being an influencer. So the teacher's making it really relevant to the child and connecting it to something in social media. And that's really contributing to this child's sense of empathy. And then you can also see the contagion. And in the same way that often we talk about negative emotions having a contagion, you can see that this girl is conceptualizing this as one child has empathy, another child has empathy, and then it can grow and grow and grow. And it can take a long time, but then the whole world can be empathic or empathetic. And I just think this is a wonderful example of pulling together the idea of children watch, children practice, and children learn skills, and that all of those require these really supportive relationships from the adults and kids around them. So we're going to focus in on learning in two areas. One is about emotion regulation, and another is about social relationships. Now, you might wonder why I thought about chose emotion regulation and social relationships to talk about how kids learn these skills and how parents can teach these skills. And that's because these are the things that I'm hearing the most during these pandemic times, is that people are having a hard time managing strong emotions, teaching their kids to work with these strong emotions and respond to strong emotions. And then also that social skills. I don't know whether you've seen some of the jokes on Saturday Night Live or otherwise about atrophied social skills, but I don't know about you, but when I go back to work, I'm really going to need to clean up my act because I've gotten a little weird at home. And so, we all need a little work with our social skills, but especially with kids, it's really, this has been a very, very challenging time for them. So here's some things that we know. Understatement, children and youth have had a difficult year. We see very high levels of depression in youth. We see a lot of anxiety. Kids are showing anxiety about physical safety when they go back to school and even being social with others in the context of COVID. So adults can help children recognize these feelings that they're having, understand those feelings, express those feelings in acceptable ways, and manage those feelings. So we're going to talk about some of these emotion skills. Emotion skills require recognition and understanding. And these are some things some parents can do with their kids. You can give children the words to describe different emotions. So there is a difference between jealousy and shame and sadness. And, so you move away from just describing emotions as good versus bad and towards these more nuanced things like I feel fearful, or I feel anxious, or I feel nervous. Those are all different emotions. Can help children express how their body feels when they experience different emotions. So some very young children are going back to school and they're feeling anxious and they've never felt anxious before. And they don't even have words for that feeling of anxiety. But what happens when you feel anxious? Well, you feel a little bit clammy, you feel your heart go fast. And so helping kids understand what their body feels like when they're experiencing anxiety is very important. Can help your children see that all emotions are okay and normal to experience. So as adults, we know that there's some feelings that we don't like experiencing as much as others, but it's important to help children realize that all are okay and that it's normal to experience many different negative emotions as well as positive emotions. Can help children understand that there are healthy and unhealthy ways to express emotions. And you can help children realize the impact of their emotions on others. So these are a few things that parents can do. So to do this, emotion skills require strategies for emotion management and for emotional expression. So you can give kids phrases to use. So a big one right now is kids needing alone time. Is that they've spent a lot of time alone. They're being put back into, they're walking back into these social situations, and they need a way to say, I need some alone time now. Well, giving kids that phrase and modeling that phrase, as a parent, you might need some alone time sometimes. And it's okay to say, I need some alone time, and teach your children, I need some alone time. It's a great phrase, and it's a great way of handling some strong emotions. You can also, with young children, you might teach them to say, I'm afraid I might get COVID, because that's something that's coming up a lot in young kids. And so having them know how to say that and understand that that's a real feeling, and sort of validating those feelings is an important thing. You can give children skills to use when they have strong emotions. So you can give children deep breathing exercises when they feel anxious. You give them stress balls or okay places to scream when they feel angry. Children often need runaround time when they are upset. Sometimes I wish that runaround time would work as effectively for adults as it does for children, but it does not necessarily do so. But runaround time is a good idea. You can use a lot of books to talk about anger. Sometimes it's hard to talk about emotions, just, bringing them up raw. This book is a children's book, for example, when Sophie gets angry, really, really angry, and it has wonderful examples of the emotions that she's feeling and how that is, how she expresses it, and then ways of resolving, of feeling that anger, understanding that anger, and then resolving it over time and expressing it in healthy ways. So there are a lot of books, and almost any book you open has emotions of their characters, and just bringing that up and talking about those emotions and the strategies that people are using in books is healthy. So I often think you should help your children learn about their strong emotions, especially when those strong emotions are not happening. So this is what I mean, is the biggest mistake that I see over and over is that teachers or parents will try to teach their children about emotions when children have just lost it in the middle of a temper tantrum. That is not a time when children are going to be receptive to learning about emotions. It's much better to choose times when they feel calm, when they feel rested, when they feel receptive to listening. Those are the times to talk about emotions. So you want to try to prevent those temper tantrums from occurring and talk about strong emotions at times when kids are feeling calm and relaxed. That's very easy to say, it's very hard to do. But when you feel frustrated because your child has had a tantrum and you're trying to teach them how to manage their emotions in the middle of a tantrum, you can realize that that reason it's not going to work is because of what anger is all about. Okay, so pause there for a moment. Let me check the chat here. Yes. Okay, so let's talk about the development of relationship skills. So what does research say about how we choose friends? Now, this is a really important idea. So all humans have a universal tendency to prefer some people over others in their friendship groups. We have a natural tendency towards homophily, which means we tend to bond with people who are like us. And we have a universal tendency toward propinquity. That means we tend to bond with people who are near us. So the people who become our friends most easily, and this is the natural way we are people who are from the same culture, from the same religion, the same race, the same ethnicity as us. That's homophily. People who live near us, people in our neighborhood, people who live in the same city. So we are naturally built to have friends who are a lot like us. So here's the important thing, is that adults need to help children stretch and help their children spend time in situations with people who are different from them. And this is not an easy thing to do. What's amazing, and one of the assets of the Charlottesville City Schools, is that there is an opportunity to really help kids stretch and not just choose friends who are just like them and from the same neighborhoods, but to choose friends who are different than them. And I know that my own kids have many friends who are different from them. and really learned a lot from that experience. That was one of the most wonderful experiences they had and for them. So this is an idea about this idea of like stretching kids to really be around people who are different than them. Now, right now, during COVID times, these relationship skills aren't just about being with people who are different than you, but also about the people who used to be your friends maybe a year ago and you haven't seen in a year. And now you're recreating these friendships and your social skills might not be quite up to par. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot to learn. Let's talk about some of the things kids need to learn to be able to develop these relationship skills. So relationship skills require active listening. This means really listening to each other. Now, I've seen many teachers do a beautiful job of teaching kids how to listen to each other actively. You can have a conversation with your child and use active listening. Show the child how you're listening carefully to them. Talk about what your ears and mouths and eyes are doing when you're actively listening to them. Repeat what your child is saying. Introduce the idea that active listening means you can repeat back what someone else is saying. And practice, practice, practice. So one of the key things about relationship skills is really being able to listen to other people and be able to respond back to them and be able to say what they've just said. Now, relationship skills requires respectful communication. So I have this little picture over on the left-hand side of the screen because I think at some point in life, we all understand this idea that we might be thinking one thing, but we need to say another. That it would be very disrespectful just to say everything that comes to mind all the time. But if you think about it, kids need to learn that. That's like something that kids need to learn, that you can't just say everything that is in your mind for many reasons. And that's part of developing social skills. So sometimes it helps to give kids a little bit of help. And these are respectful communication stems. These came from my book and also from classrooms that I've seen where kids will, where you can teach kids to say, I agree with so-and-so, and I think that, and I agree, I thought about it in a similar way. Now it's easy for kids to learn how to agree with each other. It's a little harder to teach them to disagree. I respectfully disagree with so-and-so because I think that. I like your ideas, but these are really important things to be able to say to develop good relationship skills. The other thing is learning how to ask questions is not a straightforward idea. So teaching kids to say, can you tell me more about blank? Or what do you mean by blank? Or could you please explain blank? This is a really important idea. So, when you're having a conversation with somebody and somebody says, I got new shoes, well, every first grader then wants to talk about their new shoes. But really what you should be doing is talking about the person's new shoes who just got new shoes. But you need to teach kids to say things like, tell me more about your new shoes. And so that's a process, and you can unpack that and teach kids how to, these are basic skills that kids can learn, and they can learn how to ask questions of other people. Relationship skills really require understanding and having respect for people for multiple perspectives. So it's very important in developing social skills that you read books that show children with different preferences, different cultures, or different points of view. You want to have children link the book to their own experience. And you want to help children understand different perspectives and give examples of how maybe the characters in the books have different perspectives. You want to discuss respect and explain why it's so important. Help children how to ask questions to help understand someone else's perspective. Tell me more about this, or tell me about your tradition of doing this, or tell me, do you have a reason that you do that? Asking those questions is so healthy. And then practice, practice, practice. Here are a few books that are example books that bring up different perspectives. So, and give kids and families a chance to talk about different points of view and different perspectives on issues. That are just, there's so many books out there that do this. And the question is when you can, as a parent, you can be very intentional. So Same Son here is about an immigrant from India who's living in New York City with the daughter of a coal miner who's living in Kentucky. And they're pen pals. And they're writing books, they're writing letters back and forth and discovering things about each other and their different perspectives on their life and their different experiences. This is the kind of thing that really helps develop and cultivate respect for people who are different. So let's turn to a few final words, and then I'll take some questions. So what can you do to improve your children's social and emotional skills, especially given the pandemic? Well, here are a few common concerns. What are relationship skills, and what can I do to help my children redevelop them? Other ways I can help my child manage anxiety and fear related to COVID. What is self-control and how can I teach it now? Those are some of the most common concerns that I hear among families. So one important point is this idea of listening carefully to understand your children's experiences. So kids will often mask what they're really feeling, and you really have to listen and watch carefully. And in this time when people are busy, distracted, stressed, it's very easy to forget to listen. And so I'm going to give you an example of a fourth grade girl in one of the Charlottesville City schools who was having problems in math. And instead of just having problems in math, she was sort of disappearing into the bathroom. This is during the online schooling. She was sort of disappearing into the bathroom. Somehow there were always internet problems when they were having math class. And the teacher noticed this and brought this to the attention of the parent. And what they discovered is the girl then revealed, and she was so ashamed of this, but she revealed that there was a unit, about a 2-week unit in her third grade math class where she did not learn certain skills. It was spring of 2020, and she just missed these 2 weeks of math skills. And that was causing this huge problem that was so easy to fix, that required very, very careful listening to the nature of the problem. Another piece of this has to do with listening carefully. It's observing your child's behavior and responding to their emotional needs, while at the same time stretching your child to return to a regular social experience. So we're going to see a lot of times where kids are going to start using the pandemic fear to mask some of the things that are really going on. So they might be anxious about coming back to school, and they might not show that so well, but they might use it almost as an excuse to not get re-engaged socially if they're very socially isolated, for example. So there's a lot of reasons to kind of observe your child's behavior and respond to their emotional needs. Then at the same point, it's really important not to just indulge that. You're going to need to stretch your child to return to a regular social experience. And that's going to be very challenging and very gradual for some kids, and some kids will naturally go to the social experience very easily. There's a balance between these two things. The other thing that we don't often talk about is identifying our child's strengths. One of the things about this pandemic is that kids have learned a ton during this pandemic. And this can always be an anchor for them, and you can remind them that of all of the new skills that they learn during this time, organizational skills, patience, and this is something you can remind children of. And let me remind you, you are always creating a narrative for your child. You're almost like the narrator in a play, and you're kind of helping them live their experiences and understand their experiences. When they're making sense out of this pandemic experience, you can describe some of the strengths that they've shown this year. You can kind of hold those up as something that you admire about them and that they can leverage going forward. Another point is to model the skills that you want to see in your children. So children will naturally do what their parents do, what their families do, what their older siblings do. And one of the things that we're seeing a lot right now is that parents are feeling a lot of guilt that maybe they haven't been the best parents over the last year. Guess what? Nobody has been the best parent over this last year. That is completely normal. And what we know is that when children are in healthy social contexts, in healthy schools that promote equity, in healthy homes, they grow towards health. And so if you're wondering, have I wrecked my kids for good this past year? Chances are you haven't. And chances are your child will be okay if they're in healthy contexts in school and at home going forward. And that what you want to do is you want to think about modeling the skills you want to see in your children. And I'll close with this idea of taking care of yourself. I think one of the things that's really important in teaching kids social emotional skills is that the adults around them need to be healthy and aware and comfortable to be able to do that. And now is not, I mean, no, it seems like nobody is right now gearing up for a 2-week Mexican vacation, even though that may be what some people want. But, there may be little pockets in your day that bring you joy. And I want to make sure that all parents are taking advantage of those little moments, whether it's a very hot cup of coffee in the morning or time to yourself in the evening for 10 minutes. It can be small, but that important process of recharging is really critical. And without that, you can't teach your kids good social emotional skills because you don't have the resources to show them yourself. And with that, I will take questions.